Welcome back to Your Real Estate Voice with Barb Schlinker, the weekly radio show that informs and educates you on how to buy or sell real estate with Barb Schlinker, the owner broker of Your Home Sold Guaranteed Realty. Now, Barb, after commissions to buyers agents are no longer, oh, I see what, 321. Barb, after commissions to buyers agents are no longer offered online, this has likely changed how sales get done. So, what is the difference between a listing agent and a selling agent?
Well, Richard, this whole thing started about 10 years ago. There was a lawsuit brought on by home sellers who basically said, wait, I pay the whole commission here, but the buyer's agent's working against me. They're trying to beat me up on price and repairs and concessions and threatening to not close right before closing and all the crazy stuff that takes place, contract to closing. And seems to me, if I'm paying for that, it's like paying somebody's attorney or something that's suing me. It doesn't make sense. So it started to take off. The Department of Justice got involved. They started doing some investigations. And what they found out was the National Association of Realtors kind of established this thing. Well, just to walk back the history, when I first started, it used to be that everybody worked for the seller because the seller paid the commission. That was the theory, right? But some of the commission was split with the buyer's agent, so all they could leverage all the buyers that were available in the buyer population. However, in the late 90s, kind of when I started in real estate, they came up with this new thing called buyer agency, meaning I'm only working for the buyer. I'm not working for you, Mr. Seller, even though you're paying me. So, and it created this kind of adversarial scenario. And as a result, that's how the lawsuit came about. And it took traction. And when the DOJ looked into it, they discovered that there were some real estate brokerages that actually had within their training documentation, hey, agent, if you don't offer at least so much commission to the buyer's agent, those agents are going to steer away from your property and go sell another one. And that is price fixing, antitrust. I don't know, Richard, you probably know more about it than I do with your legal background, but it was a problem. And it was still going on right up until they changed this rule last August. In fact, I took over a listing from another discount broker that was only offering 1% that was published in the MLS. And guess what? They weren't getting any showings. The agents didn't want to go work for 1%, right? So this lawsuit got settled. The National Association had to pay a lot of money to stop all of these lawsuits from happening because these attorneys were filing class action lawsuits on behalf of home sellers that paid a commission to a buyer's agent, and they were winning and getting it back. So the National Association said, okay, we give. What we're going to do is no longer is a commission to a buyer's agent published in the multiple listing service. It wasn't just in the multiple listing service. It was also on Zillow and Realtor.com, everywhere where the public could see. They thought that was a good idea before because they thought, oh, well, if the buyer understands how much commission is offered, they can see it and they'll know if their agent is steering them away from the house. But you know how it is. There's a lot of things about influence that take place. So they stripped that completely out of any online access. The amount of commission paid to a buyer's agent is just not available. And what the state of Colorado did is they put it in the contract and they said, okay, very last paragraph, who's going to pay the buyer agent fee? Is it going to be the seller? Is it going to be the buyer? Is it going to be between the two agents? It made it negotiable. And that probably is a good thing. The problem is it's still not really tied to performance. So the buyer's agents are still advocating or working solely for their buyer, sometimes against the seller and maybe not to get it to the finish line, right? So what does a listing agent do? What does a buyer's agent do? Well, a listing agent really has a duty, according to their agreements, to work for the seller. Their job is to go get a buyer, but they may not represent the buyer who ultimately brings the contract on the house. So then the role kind of changes to, all right, well, we got to, promote the interest of the seller to get it to the finish line. The problem with the whole setup, the way it is right now, is that there's no establishment of value. In fact, there's not even a job description for what a listing agent does or what a selling agent does. There is no, it's the Wild West out there for real estate. So they all kind of just copy each other and make it up and do what they think is right. In general, a seller's agent is going to put a home on the listing service to make it available for sale. It will get shared with thousands of other websites, including the multiple listing, realtor.com, zillowhomes.com, a whole bunch of others, right? And so in my view, the listing agent's job is to create demand, to get the home sold and to create demand, right? But what's a buyer's agent do? Well, they're kind of like they go show the home and they claim they're representing the buyer, or maybe they're finding the buyer the right home. We do that for our buyers. Some of our sales never go on the listing service per the seller's direction, and we find a buyer for it. So that's one of the unique services that we bring to the table. But most agents are just showing homes that the buyers can already find on the internet. They're getting them in the door and they're writing up the offer for that buyer and facilitating the transaction. So it's really interesting that, I came from a background of being in the military. I was in the Navy. I worked both as an air traffic controller and worked my way up through the ranks and became an intel officer. My last job was inside NORAD. And, for every single job I had in the service, there was a procedure, a checklist, a how you did things, and how you didn't do things. And there were regulations around the job that we did. It's not so much in real estate. In fact, basically, you have to do what you say you're going to do, but there's no definition of what you're going to do. I don't know if that makes sense, Richard.
I think it does. Yeah. I mean, your guidance on this, I think, is what most people want. And honestly, I think they need it as well.
So on the buyer side, what are they doing? Well, they're trying to, like I have agents that work for me right now that are really good negotiators. I mean, they can definitely get a good price for the buyer on top of finding the buyer the home that they're looking for, some of which never make it on the market. And buyers absolutely love that. That's a service that they value and they're willing to pay for. And the buyers are essentially paying for it in the form of the sales price. So what happens is it falls on the seller's shoulder to pay some or all of the buyer agent's fee, but it is negotiable. And that's one of the things that really changed in the last year. And I even saw what I'm seeing to this day is that if an agent has a buyer interested in one of my lists, I call and go, how much commission is your seller going to pay me for bringing my buyer? So some of them do it before they even show the home as a screening, which is not the intention. The two rules were that commission is not offered online anywhere, and that the buyer's agent has to have a written agreement with that buyer about how they will get paid, not what they will do, but how they will get paid if they were to help the buyer consummate the sale. It's kind of crazy. And the other part of that piece, there is no agreement police over the buyer agency agreement. There is just, I mean, we do have to have our forms in case our files get audited. That is required by the state, but not this new agreement that was required by the National Association of Realtors. They're not saying, oh, well, before you show a home, send me your agreement. That's not happening at all. So we don't know if the buyers showing homes have a written agreement about how they're going to get paid already. We don't know that for sure. In fact, my experience has been, we don't even know if these buyers have verified that these buyers have the ability to buy the home, or that they've checked with the buyer, which I think is important to find out what the buyer is looking for. So that is kind of what's going on now. And part of what we do, it both with buyers and sellers, is we sit down and we show them what we think our duties are, what we will do for them. And then we get them signed to an agreement based on how we're going to perform. And that's worked really well for us. So if you are thinking of making a move, give us a call, 719-301-3900, or go to barbhasthebuyers.com. Richard?
Barb, we're discussing what's the difference between a listing agent and a selling agent. So, how do our listeners understand what is the best solution for their needs?
Well, I think for a home seller, it is definitely laid out in writing that they're going to do this, this, and this. And we actually sit down and do a full-on presentation, not just about marketing, but about pricing and share with them our expertise. And then they can decide whether or not they want to work with us. On the buyer side, most of the time I don't see it. Most of the buyers actually meet the buyer for the first time at the house. So they don't know if they can buy a house on Craigslist or that they qualify. Because the first thing that happens is the listing agent takes the house, they create demand with their marketing and pricing and all that. So they've created the demand. But then a buyer wants to see a home, they connect up with the buyer's agent, they go look at the home, and then they decide what they're looking for, whether or not they qualify for it. So to me, it's kind of a backwards thing. That's why in the past I've kind of joked around. I said I felt like some buyers agents act like overpaid door openers. Many of them don't even want to do the job that I think they should be doing, like advocate for their buyer, represent them on the inspection, things like that. Just recently on a very high-end sale, when we're in negotiations to keep the contract together, where the paydays are really big, and when you go up over $1 million on the sales price, the agent that brought the buyer wouldn't talk to me about it. Oh no, that's done by my assistant, my transaction coordinator. I'm like, is that person licensed? Because it could mean the difference between your buyer getting this house or the next buyer getting this house and the whole deal falling apart. Oh yeah, he's licensed. He does that. I don't do that. And I'm just like, wow, I just don't understand. They define their own job as they go on. So as a consumer, you need to ask this question. If I'm working with you and I'm buying a home, are you going to work with me? Are you going to represent me? Or are you going to abdicate some of the responsibilities of contract to closing, like important deadlines that could mean the difference of you being able to negotiate on something or not? Are those going to be handed off to some unlicensed vendor like that they call transaction coordinator? That's another thing the agents are doing, is they're hiring these things called transaction coordinator. They're not licensed, there's no job description, and they are supposed to track important deadlines for the buyer. They actually will reach out to the listing agent and try to get the listing agent to do their job through the transaction coordinator. And many times I've seen them miss really important deadlines. So they're paying this vendor $300, $400, $500 to track their deadlines, and they mess it up. And it's a licensed person's requirement to be paying attention to what's going on with that contract that they wrote, and they're obligated to get to the finish line. So it's the Wild West out there, honestly. And I think at the end of the day, as a consumer, you got to sit down and get a face-to-face with whoever you want to work with and make sure you're comfortable going forward. If you are thinking of making a move, give us a call, 719-301-3900, or go to barbhasthebuyers.com. Richard?
Barb Schlinker is the only agent I would recommend when you're thinking of making a move. You're listening to Your Real Estate Voice with Barb Schlinker. She's host of the program and owner broker of Your Home Sold Guaranteed Realty. We'll take a short break. When we come back, the top steps to downsize and declutter before selling your house. Plus, we'll have Barb's hot new listings. Stay tuned for that.